Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Faculty of Educational Sciences, the English Language Teacher Education School, and the Millennium Nucleus for the Science of Learning, we are pleased to welcome you to the first Forum on Bilingual Education in Chile, Insights into Mind, Language, and Identity. This academic event seeks to explore diverse perspectives on bilingualism and its implications for cognition, education, and learning. We are honored to be joined today by distinguished national and international guests, researchers, educators, and students, both in person and online. We kindly ask you that you silence your phones so we may proceed without interruptions. Please. To begin our forum, we would like to warmly welcome the authorities joining us today. Dr. Mauricio Vélez Campos, Dean of the Faculty of Educational Sciences. Carla Bustos Urra, Academic Secretary of the Faculty of Educational Sciences. Dr. Karen Gajardo Asbun, Director of the English Language Teacher Education School. Dr. Roberto Ferreira Campos, Director of the Millennium Nucleus for the Science of Learning. Gabriel Pairican Torres, Head of the English Language Teaching Program for Secondary Education. Marianela Flores Gonzalez, Head of the Primary Education Program with a specialization in English. Dr. Claudia Carrasco Manriquez, Head of the Early Childhood Education Program with a specialization in English. Now, we extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests. Dr. Judith Kroll from University of California, Irvine in the United States, who is on Zoom from the Netherlands right now. Dr. Cristian Sangüesa Campos, Universidad de Concepción. Dr. Elizabeth Quintrileo Yancao from Universidad del Biobío, and Catherine Díaz Vargas from Universidad de Concepción. We would like to give a special welcome to our students in their senior year who are presenting today. They will soon graduate and join us as fellow educators. Welcome as well to all the students, teachers, faculty members, and everyone joining us today, both in the auditorium and on Zoom. Thank you for joining us in this important space for dialogue, learning, and reflection on bilingual education. Bilingualism has become a central topic of discussion in today's globalized world. Beyond the ability to communicate in two or more languages, it reflects the richness of cultural exchange, the complexities of identity, and the cognitive benefits that bilingual individuals often experience. In education, bilingualism fosters greater cognitive flexibility, improved executive functions, and enhanced metalinguistic awareness. It also enhances a student's capacity to navigate diverse social and academic contexts. Globally, bilingual education is a growing field that intersects with issues of migration, indigenous language preservation, and equitable access to knowledge. In Chile, bilingualism takes on multiple forms and holds particular significance. It encompasses not only the teaching of international languages, such as English, but also the revitalization of indigenous languages and the linguistic practices of diverse communities, including deaf communities and migrant populations. Together, these expressions of bilingualism contribute to a more inclusive and pluralistic educational landscape. It is in this spirit that we gather here today to reflect on the multiple dimensions of bilingualism and its relevance for both global and local educational practices. Now, to officially open this forum, we invite Dr. Mauricio Vélez Campos, Dean of the Faculty of Educational Sciences, to deliver his opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. There are lots of people that are joining us here today in person, and there are quite a few, maybe more than a few, that are joining us through the digital ether. And of course, it gives me very great pleasure to say the opening remarks of this wonderful conference that is going to be entirely devoted to bilingualism and all the intricacies of bilingualism. I think I need to take an opportunity to congratulate the organizing committee, Professora Macarena in particular, and all those who have been assisting her in putting together this wonderful conference. And it's interesting to see that this conference is going to comprise local voices of student teachers. And of course, there's going to be a presentation by more seasoned scholars later presenting their book. And of course, we are eager to listen to the presentation by our keynote speaker, Professor Kroll. So I think that we're all eager to listen to her presentation. A word of advice, though, let us not underestimate the wisdom that can come from our young student teachers and the work they have been doing for the past months, perhaps. So congratulations as well. And halfway through, I think we're going to be enjoying some well-earned coffee. Maybe coffee is a universal language, which we are all going to enjoy. So I don't think I've got more to say other than thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Dean, for those words. Now it is time for our keynote speaker, Dr. Judith Kroll. Dr. Kroll is a distinguished professor in the School of Education at the University of California, Irvine in the United States. She is a world-renowned expert in the cognitive science of bilingualism. Over the past decades, she has led groundbreaking research that explores how bilingual individuals manage two or more languages in the mind and in the brain, revealing the deep cognitive mechanisms that support second language acquisition. Her work has been consistently funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, and her findings have shaped our understanding of the bilingual mind across psychology, linguistics, education, and neuroscience. Dr. Kroll is also co-director of Bilingualism Matters in California, a center that connects research with schools and communities. Dr. Kroll is not only a prolific researcher with hundreds of publications in leading scientific journals, but she's also widely regarded as one of the foremost voices in the field of bilingualism worldwide. She is also the recipient of several prestigious honors, including the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship for her research project on bilingual minds and brains, and the Clifford T. Morgan Distinguished Leadership Award from the I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I'm going to go again. She's the recipient of several prestigious honors, including the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship for her research project on bilingual minds and brains, and the Clifford T. Morgan Distinguished Leadership Award from the Psychonomic Society. She has been elected Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Psychological Association, the Association for Psychological Science, and other major scholarly societies. Dr. Kroll also co-founded the influential journal Bilingualism, Language and Cognition, and the international organization Women in Cognitive Science, both of which have played key roles in shaping research and promoting equity in the field. It is a true privilege to have her with us today. She will deliver the keynote address titled Cognitive Approaches to Bilingualism and Language Learning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Judith Kroll.
Thank you so much, Macarena. I'm assuming I can share my screen.
You should.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for very, very generous introduction and for the honor of being invited to give this talk to all of you. I have to say from the start, I'm here in Amsterdam. It's 4-something in the afternoon, and I just want to say that I have a bit too much and a bit too much enthusiasm for what I want to share with you. And I told Macarena in advance that I have a few too many slides, so I'm going to go quickly. And I want to offer to share the slides with anyone who's interested in having them. My goal today is to give you a sense of the research perspective that we've taken in looking at cognitive approaches to bilingualism and language learning, and particularly focused on how variation and experience shapes learning outcomes. And I will just say that there may be some details. I know that we have a very diverse audience, and there may be some details that not everyone is familiar with. And if so, I apologize for that, but I'm going to go quickly and happy at the end to take questions. Happy also for you to contact me by email afterwards, and very happy to share the slides. So where do we start? Preaching to the choir, because I know all of you understand this and agree. More people in the world are bilingual and multilingual than monolingual, but it's really been relatively recently that the field of language and learning science has really tuned into that idea and not just examined only monolingual speakers and speakers of English. Bilingualism, especially for adult learners or heritage speakers with a home language other than the language of the society, have often been considered a problem. Bilingualism has traditionally been viewed as a complication to the study of language, mind, and the brain, which is quite curious given how many bilinguals there are in the world. And in the last 20 to 30 years, there has been an upsurge of research on this topic, suggesting profound linguistic, cognitive, and neural consequences. And what I want to do today is try to share some of that with you and try to share our excitement about what we think we are now learning about what it means to learn more than one language and use more than one language. The graph on the left are just data from Google Scholar showing citations between 2000 and 2023, and you can see that there's this very sharp rise in the number of papers written with the word bilingual. And what have we learned? Well, what we've learned, if we step back, is that being bilingual changes the architecture of your brain. A key observation and a key point in what I want to share today is the idea that brains are plastic throughout the lifespan. We change. Bilingualism is dynamic. I'm going to argue today that learning and using 2 or more languages creates enduring consequences for the mind and the brain, for education, and for health. And so the kinds of questions we want to ask are, how are minds and brains changed by learning and using 2 languages? And I want to argue that we need to place this research on bilingualism in a context that acknowledges variation, and acknowledges variation in particular, not only among individuals, but also in the social, cultural, political reality of language use, something that only really has recently been integrated into all of this language science. And by exploiting variation, it's not just that we become more inclusive, but we create a lens that reveals new truths about human experience. Now, because this isn't a mystery story, and I don't need to hold the bottom line, I don't need to hold the whodunit until the end, I want to give this away. And the argument I want to make is that minds and brains adapt to accommodate the use of two languages. And that adaptation is not at a cost. It is a cognitive investment that occurs naturally. The native language or the dominant language changes to accommodate the second language. It's as if you were inviting guests for dinner and saying, we need to rearrange our house to allow the other language to come and be here with us. And so the idea is that there is an accommodation that occurs, and that accommodation is not something that requires a cognitive effort of a sort that that is detrimental, but rather we're going to see that it's an investment that becomes advantageous. And that adaptation has consequences for language, but also for creating a resilient mind and brain. So I need to take one time out for just a moment to say who is bilingual, because in the past, there's been a lot of confusion about who is bilingual, who's not bilingual, what is a true bilingual. And I have to admit that I am trained as a cognitive scientist, so I'm not a linguist by training, and I'm going to take a very liberal approach to this. And so we're going to assume that anyone who actively uses two languages is bilingual of one sort or the other. People differ in how proficient they are, when they learn the languages, the context in which they learn the languages, and we're going to discuss all of those things. But we're going to take a very liberal approach to who is bilingual. And what I'm going to do today is to start backwards. I want to first ask, what are the consequences of being bilingual? And then I want to consider what bilinguals might do with language that produce those consequences. And of course, there is a huge literature of research that has addressed these issues. Here, I'm going to give you the briefest sampling of some of the evidence just to give you a feeling for it. And again, I'm very happy to share any other information anyone here might be interested in having. So we start at the beginning of the lifespan with babies. Research on babies exposed to two or more languages from birth has produced remarkable evidence showing that bilingualism creates what Laura Ann Petito called a perceptual wedge. What does she mean by perceptual wedge? The idea of a perceptual wedge is the idea that the door is going to be open. Bilingual babies who are exposed to two or more languages from birth, appear to have a more open speech system. They're not confused by the presence of two languages. What happens is they grow a speech system that's ready to take in any language to which they're exposed, and languages, they don't shut down just to the language that the one language that a monolingual baby might become expert in immediately. There are consequences of that developmental trajectory, but it's very, very clear there are now many, many studies that support the idea that bilingualism creates openness in young infants. The picture we have here is a picture from a study that was done in Patricia Kuhl's lab at University of Washington. The machine is a magnetoencephalography machine. It's not invasive. It does not hurt the baby. And what they can do is they can look to see what brain activity is happening as babies are listening to speech. Bilingual babies are activating different areas of their brain than monolingually exposed babies. And moreover, by the time they are 11 months old, the areas of their brain that are responsible for decision-making, cognitive, executive functions begin to come online more quickly than they do for monolingually exposed babies. So there's right away from the start, there is a real consequence of bilingualism, even for the youngest listeners who you might not actually call bilingual or crib bilinguals. If we go up the lifespan to young adults, and this is a brain imaging study by Juvenal Bacelevi's group, what they did here is they asked, what happens if young adults are making a decision about a purely cognitive task. Here you have a task called the flanker task. You have an arrow pointed in one direction. The task is very simple. Just press a button. Which direction is that arrow pointed? But what you can see is you can flank that arrow. You can surround that arrow with other information that's either converging or conflicting. And typically, all humans have more difficulty when it conflicts. But here's the thing. Compare the brain activity we see for the bilinguals on the left and the monolinguals on the right. You see for the monolinguals that bright yellow spot. The monolinguals are activating this area of the brain, which happens to be the anterior cingulate cortex, which is well known as an area responsible for conflict monitoring. The bilinguals on the left are doing the same thing. They're activating the same area, but you see the tiniest bit, that little red dot. The point is that bilinguals seem to be able to solve the same problem more efficiently. They need less brain power to be able to solve exactly the same problem. So they're not using a different area of the brain. They're just doing it more efficiently. And what we see in aging, if we now move up the lifespan, is we see that aging is not kind to the brain. The brain begins to show many changes as people age, and even in normal aging, not only in pathological aging, but what we see is that there's a loss of gray matter volume. We see a whole set of changes that are really not kind to the brain and also not kind to the cognition that those brain areas are responsible for. But if we look at what happens in bilingual brains, these are older, healthy adults. And you look at the graph on the top and you look at the graph on the bottom. The graph on the top is for monolinguals and the bottom is for bilinguals. And I'm not going to go into all the gory details. But what you see is that the monolinguals show this sharp decline. What that decline is over age. You see that monolinguals are losing gray matter over age as they age up to around 75. The bilinguals on the bottom are not showing that effect. They're showing there's a lot of variation, but there's no effect of age, which suggests that the experience of using two languages is somehow protecting them from cognitive decline. Now, the most provocative findings of all have come from evidence on dementia. And research by a number of different people, initially discovered by Ellen Bialystok's lab in Toronto, showed that bilingualism appears to delay the onset of Alzheimer's type dementia symptoms by 4 to 5 years. So bilinguals who are going to develop dementia are going to develop dementia. The bilingualism does not protect them against dementia. But what it protects them against are the symptoms of dementia. So for 4 to 5 years, they function as if they are cognitively intact. And what we know is even now in 2025, all these years later, there's no drug that has that effect. And the studies show that if you actually image the brains of bilinguals at the point where they're finally diagnosed, what you see is they're actually more diseased than the monolingual brains. So they have been doing more with less. And the question is, what produces these abilities? So what do bilinguals do that produces these consequences that suggest that bilingualism creates resilience? And so this is a paper that we wrote more than a decade ago now, where we argued that there were 3 main discoveries about bilingualism that needed to be taken into account. One is that both languages are always active and competing. And that's going to seem very counterintuitive to some of you, perhaps, because in fact, you're sitting listening to me right now in English. Many of you are dominant Spanish speakers, but I'm speaking to you in English, and you're probably not translating into Spanish. You're thinking and listening to me directly with English. But despite that, we have a lot of evidence, and it's not controversial anymore, that both languages are always online together. The second observation, the second discovery, is that the native or dominant language changes in response to learning and using a second language, an L2. And so this is somewhat counterintuitive to people, I think, because the idea that we tend to think that our native language whatever the first exposed language was in life, is just with us as a very stable entity. And what the research on bilingualism shows is that when you learn and use another language, it affects the native language. And we're going to see in what I'm going to talk about now that this is going to be a very, very important factor. And finally, as what we've seen in the examples that I sampled, that the consequences of bilingualism are not just limited to language. They extend beyond language to reorganization of brain networks that hold implications for the ways that bilinguals negotiate cognitive competition. So the question, how might bilingualism create this cognitive resilience? And the metaphor that's been proposed is that the bilingual is a mental juggler, that both languages are active, as I said a moment ago, regardless of the requirement to use one language alone. This is a little scheme of a Dutch-English bilingual naming this object, which is, I'm here in the Netherlands at the moment. And I can tell you that if you cross the street, you have to be very careful because it's a bit like the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Bird, but with bicycles everywhere. And but if you're a Dutch English bilingual, you can actually name that object in Dutch, which is fiets, or in English, which is bike, and you're constantly making a decision about which one. The point is that what the research shows is that there is parallel activation. Both alternatives come online, and what bilinguals need to do is they need to make choices. Sometimes the two alternatives that come online are similar and converge, and sometimes they conflict. So the idea here is that we let 1,000 flowers bloom. Everything comes up together. And that computationally, that may seem to you like a terrible, terrible problem. But what we see is that bilinguals learn to attend in ways that don't create a problem. They are able to recruit cognitive resources that make this problem actually turn into a benefit. So the initial story about bilingualism and why it might create resilience was very simple. The idea was that bilinguals use their cognitive resources to resolve competition. And they essentially become expert jugglers. And the question then is, how do they use these skills? And how does variation across bilingual experience shape these consequences? Bilinguals are not all the same, and not all contexts of learning or language use are the same. And so the issue that we want to consider is how this might occur and how it might differ under different circumstances. So many past studies have looked at the effect of the dominant native or first language on the less dominant second language. And this is no longer controversial. There is absolutely clear evidence from hundreds and hundreds of studies that both languages are active and influencing one another all of the time. And interestingly, we see it for proficient speakers as well as for learners. We see it for speakers whose languages may seem structurally distinct, like Chinese and English, or ASL and Anglo-American Sign Language and English, as well as for languages that are more similar to one another. And we see it at every level of language processing for the lexicon, phonology, and the grammar. In a lot of the research that my students and I have conducted, what we've done is we've turned the tables on this question. And what we've asked is, okay, we know that the dominant first language affects the second language, but let's now ask, does the second language come to affect the first language? How does this bidirectional relationship work? And how is it that, what is it that bilinguals do with language that produces cognitive consequences and their neural basis? The starting point in our story is the hypothesis that bilinguals learn to regulate their native or dominant language. And so the native or dominant language changes when you learn and use a second language. For some people, for learners, that may seem a bit intimidating, the idea that I'm going to learn a second language and now it's going to change my native or dominant language. That feels like attrition. It feels like you may be losing something, What I'm going to argue is that it's not attrition at all, that it's actually an absolutely normal part of being bilingual. These are dynamics that occur all of the time. They are natural. It is a natural feature of bilingualism, not a loss. But that process is also influenced by the demands of the environment, including the context in which the bilingual two languages are used, by the demands and opportunities for the two languages afforded by the social networks in which individuals are embedded, and by the culture itself. It does not occur in isolation. So the idea here is that the regulation of the native or dominant language may be critical to achieve proficiency in both languages and to enable new adult second language learning. The native language may change to enable fluent L2 use, and successful L2 learners may be those who are in fact able to effectively regulate the native language to accommodate the second language and to negotiate the cross-language competition that characterizes proficient bilinguals. However, and this word is going to be something that I take responsibility for, the native or L1 may take a hit. Now, a hit sounds bad. A hit sounds like something you don't want to have happen. But I'm going to argue that, in fact, there are changes that may appear to be processing costs that initially slow the first language, make native language performance more error-prone, make learners less sensitive to some L1 features, and that open the L1 to the influences of the L2. I want to conceptualize this not as a cost, but as an investment, that what's happening is as bilinguals are, as people are acquiring a second language, it affects the first language and it requires some accommodation. And in that adaptation process, there are going to be changes that may superficially appear to be processing costs, but in fact, they are investments. And we hypothesize that acquiring these regulatory skills in the native language may be partially responsible for some of these wonderful cognitive consequences associated with bilingualism. So I want to present a little bit, give you a little bit of a feeling for some of the empirical results that we have that we think lead us to this claim. And this is an old study. It was done over 20 years ago. And it's something where there was a clue in our data that we didn't quite understand, but it's going back, you see that there's something that now makes complete enormous sense. So we did a study, very, very simple study that we published in 2002, where what we did is we asked second language learners. In this study, they were second language learners. They were native English speakers learning either Spanish or French. And we asked them simply to name words aloud. You see a word on a screen and you just name it in your native language, English, or in the second language, Spanish or French. And we found something very curious. We found that, well, first we found something that, of course, makes sense. If you look at the L2, which are the bars on the right, can you see the purple are less proficient, the black are more proficient? Can you see, first of all, that the L2 bars are higher than the L1 bars? So the point is that everyone here is slower in their L2 than in their L1. That makes sense. They're less proficient in the L2 than the L1. But do you see how the purple bars are higher than the black bars? What we found is that less proficient bilingual speakers were not only slower to speak their second language, they were slower to speak the first language. And we try to rule out many different alternative interpretations for why that might be the case. And what we found is no matter what we looked at, we found that there was something about being less proficient that affected the native language. And at the time, again, there could be many reasons, but what we think now is we think that this is a reflection of the regulatory processes that are engaged when individuals are using their second language. And of course, you learn to become a skilled regulator, but you're not skilled at the very start. We then went on later to examine this kind of effect, but in using cognitive neuroscience methods. This is using electrophysiology. You see this person with their head capped. There's nothing invasive going on here. We're not doing anything that's hurting anyone. We're just measuring electrical activity at the level of the scalp. And what you can do by using that kind of method is you can begin to track brain activity in time as individuals are processing language. In this study, what we did is we asked these native English speakers who were learning Spanish to simply make a lexical decision in English. This wasn't about their Spanish, it was about their English, which was their native language. We asked them, here's a word, tomato. Is tomato a real word in English? It is, but it has a translation in Spanish, tomate, that is a cognate. It's very, very similar. Is book a word in English? Yes, but the translation of book in Spanish, libro, is quite different. And so the question we had is, would the status of the relationship between the translation in English and Spanish have any consequence for the native language as they were making these decisions? So they just press a button, yes or no, is it a real word in English? And they saw some letter strings that weren't. And what we found is that if we looked at the behavior when they press buttons, they look like monolinguals. They show no effect of cognate status in English. But then when we go on and we look at their brain activity and we compare monolingual speakers to beginning learners of Spanish to intermediate learners of Spanish, and these intermediate learners of Spanish were not proficient in Spanish. They were just beginning to get a grip on Spanish. What do you see? Do you see the difference between the red and the black line? What does it mean? What it means is that we're seeing a cognate effect. So intermediate learners of Spanish who are native English speakers are beginning to be sensitive in English to the presence of a word in Spanish that is a cognate with English. So the native language is coming to be affected by the second language. And it's happening early in learning. It's happening really after just, this is a couple of semesters of university Spanish. So being bilingual is not only about acquiring and using the L2, but also about the way that L1 changes. And what we then went on to do is to ask the question of how we might show that the native language is used differently in response to the L2. So these taking a hit examples. And one of the contexts in which we're able to show this is when learners are immersed in an L2 environment during study abroad or travel. Another is in the laboratory where we can simulate immersion effects by asking people to use their L1, use their native language or their dominant language after they've spoken the second language for a while. And I'll just briefly show you some empirical results that show that we have effects of immersion on the L1. This is a study that was led by Jared Link, who was then a graduate student working in the lab at Penn State. And you can see the title of it is Losing Access to the Native Language While Immersed in a Second Language. He traveled to Salamanca, Spain, and he tested native English speakers who were learning Spanish, but now they're in Salamanca. And he compared them to classroom learners who were also native English speakers learning Spanish, but in very monolingual Pennsylvania. And basically what he found was that English, the L1, was suppressed when learners were immersed in the L2 environment. And one of the tasks he used to measure that was a task that we call verbal fluency. A verbal fluency task simply presents you with a category like, and this, I'm just illustrating it, they didn't actually see a picture here. I might say fruit, and you would then just say apple, pear, banana, blah, blah, blah. You would name all the fruits you can think of in a minute or 30 seconds. And what you see is that in this graph, we look at the number of exemplars people can produce. How many fruits can you say in this 30-second period? And first of all, what you see is, do you see how these bars on the left are higher than the bars on the right? Well, that's because these are native English speakers who are only intermediate learners of Spanish, who are either immersed or not. And so what you see right away is they're dominant in English is their native and dominant language. But take a look at the data on the right. The data on the right are for Spanish. Do you see how the black bar is greater than the open bar? The black bar are those who are in Salamanca, the immersed learners. The immersed learners produce more Spanish than the classroom learners of Spanish, and that's a good thing. It means that being immersed is helpful to learning Spanish. But the critical result in this experiment was on the left for L1. And what we see is that those students who were immersed in Salamanca produce less English. They produce less English than those who are in the classroom. And so we see this effect of suppression. There is lower semantic fluency in English, the L1, when they are immersed. And so this suggests that during this period of immersion, of study abroad, they're actually suppressing their native language while they're living in the L2 context. Now, in case you worry about what happens to them in the future and whether they have been ruined for the rest of their life, no, it bounces back once they return to the US. And that's a critical feature. What we see is that these are effects of regulation that go up and down, that bilinguals are continually changing the way they activate the two languages depending on where they are and the support for each language. We can then take this immersion example and we can bring it into the laboratory. This is a study that was actually an honors thesis at Penn State. And what it did was to look at a very simple task where Japanese English students who were international students at Penn State, whose L1 was Japanese, but who were highly proficient in English. They were studying at Penn State. English was their L2. And what we did is we looked at their performance on a very simple picture naming task. And what you see in the graph, in the table shown here, is you see that you ask them to rate themselves. Are you more proficient speaking Japanese or English? They're more proficient speaking Japanese. You see the 6.5 versus the 4.5. And then you do this category fluency task. How many different exemplars can you produce? They can produce more in Japanese than in English. They are living in the US, but you can see they are Japanese dominant. Now we give them a picture naming task, and here's the twist. In one condition, we ask them to name in L1 and then L2, name pictures in Japanese, and then name pictures in English. In the other condition, we first ask them to name pictures in English, and then follow that by naming pictures in Japanese. What happens? The order of the picture naming is crucial. What we're looking at here is the time it takes them to name simple line drawings as a function of the language and the order. When they name in Japanese first and then in English, you get the result you'd expect. These are highly Japanese dominant speakers. They're faster to name pictures in Japanese than in English. That's what you'd expect. But what happens when they have to speak English first? And when they speak English first, what you can see, do you see that the black bar, which is Japanese, is now slower than English? The black is slower than longer. It takes longer to name than the red. And you can also see how much longer they are relative to when they named it first. And the reversal of the language dominance here is something now that has become a topic of intense study to understand how it is we can simulate language immersion in the laboratory. This effect comes online in 10 minutes. And so what it means is you take these people who are highly Japanese dominant, you just simply switch the order they have to use each language, and you get an effect that looks like they're immersed. You get a reversal of their normal language dominance, again suggesting that their native language has been regulated. It's taken a hit. They have modulated the way they're speaking the native language to accommodate the second language. We've done the same kind of study with brain imaging with functional magnetic resonance imaging, and we get essentially the same. I'm not going to go through the details right now, but we get the same thing. It's the L1 that's showing these effects of having this order change. So, and other studies show that you just need a briefest exposure to your second language and you change the way you produce the first language. And again, is it a deficit? No, it's the ordinary dynamics of bilingualism that enable speakers to use both languages actively in different situations. Is it simple inhibition of the native language? No, it's an up and down regulation of the two languages, but the L1 may be critical because typically it's the dominant language. So I want to illustrate how this regulatory mechanism might come into play when bilinguals are learning a new language. And this was a study that looked at word learning in bilingual and monolingual participants. And I'm going to tell you about the data from English speakers. We had two groups of native English speakers. One of them were monolingual English speakers. The other were English-Spanish bilinguals who had English as their L1. And we decided to teach them a group of 60 novel words in Dutch. Neither group had any Dutch or German in their background, so the words were similarly novel for both groups. And what we did is we taught them these Dutch words using English, which was the native language for both groups. And so here's what would happen. In a study task, they would see the Dutch word, and then they would have to say, you should all know what that Dutch word is. And then what would happen, they would see the Dutch word for 2 seconds, and then they would be given the English translation. So you'd see fiets, you then see bike, and you're given 5 seconds if you need it. And all you'd have to do is name the word in English. So you see fiets, and then you see bike, and I'm teaching you that fiets, the translation of fiets in English is bike, you say bike, which is their English speakers, their native English speakers. It's their native language. It shouldn't be a problem. We do this experiment, so they say bike. We do this experiment and we find a remarkable effect. What we find is over study, we gave them 3 opportunities to study these and learn these Dutch words and their translations in English. And what you see over these 3 study sessions, do you see how the gray is lower than the green? This is time. This is the time it takes them to just say a word like bike. And again, in English. Do you see how the green is much slower than the gray? And in fact, it's not just a little bit slower, it's a lot slower. And so what we found is we found that the bilinguals were incredibly slow to name the words in English relative to the monolinguals. And this isn't, in those of you who know about reaction time research and speeded responses, this isn't a small effect. This is a huge effect. Our first pass on this was to think we had made a statistical error. And we thought there was a problem in the script that we were using, and we went back and we looked at it and there was no problem. We then gave them a test in which we tested them on these words. And you see how now the green is higher than the gray? What they're looking at here is how well can they recognize the word? It turns out the bilinguals, the English-Spanish bilinguals who were so slow at study were very good at tests at telling us what the word was, what words they learned, whereas the monolinguals who were very fast were much poorer. So we thought this was a really pretty curious result. And so we find the bilingual advantage in learning the new words at tests, but they're very slow at study. And we thought, well, maybe these bilinguals are just slow people, or maybe they adopted a different learning strategy. And so we gave them another test in the context of this study, and it's a good thing we did. We asked them to do this simple picture naming task, see a picture and name it. And here, what they're doing is they are simply naming in English, which is their native language. And what you see here is that the bilinguals are exactly like the monolinguals. They're not slow when they're not attempting to learn new information, which suggests that the phenomena we have discovered is about learning. It's about a strategy taken during learning that slows you down intentionally. Are they consciously aware of that strategy? Not necessarily. But it's very clear that the bilinguals are using and adopting a different strategy to learn the same information. So the conclusions are that learning to regulate the native language may lead to a learning strategy that produces some apparent costs when individuals study, but later produces benefits. And this looks very much like an example of something in the learning and memory literature that's been called a desirable difficulty, meaning that sometimes you have to suffer a little bit in learning. You have to elaborate. You've got to understand the meaning. You've got to really dig in to be able to have a good learning outcome. And bilingual experience seems to create these desirable difficulties for new learning. Where else do we see these inhibition or suppression of the L1? Well, this is more speculative. Remember early on, I told you about these results about Alzheimer's, about dementia, and that bilingualism seemed to prevent the manifestation of dementia symptoms for 4 to 5 years. But here's another finding from a few studies that suggest that when bilinguals with dementia are finally diagnosed, so at that 4 to 5 year point, they may be unable to inhibit the L1 to enable the use of the L2. They can no longer speak the second language. And the hypothesis, which is under investigation, is that the reason they can't speak the second language is that they no longer can regulate their native language. So the L1 basically you've lost the inhibitory control as part of this disease. And this loss of inhibitory control is affecting this regulatory process. And again, this is a hypothesis based on a few studies, but it's very appealing to think that in fact, it may be the same underlying phenomenon. Okay, so the native language is not the Rock of Gibraltar. The second language has persistent effects on the first for learners, for highly proficient bilinguals, and these cross-language interactions seem to come to affect the native language for proficient bilinguals as well as learners. And one implication, and for those of you who are language teachers and interested in language learning, is that the kind of native speaker model that we've had traditionally may not be the goal of adult L2 learning. The L2 learner needs to become a bilingual speaker of the L1. The bilingual is not like monolinguals in either of the two languages. And what we think is that learners adapt to the language environment itself. So there may be effects of the individual experience they have, but there are also effects of the environment and the way the environment imposes processing demands on them that create very distinct profiles of bilingual cognition. And so bilinguals differ from one another. Some bilinguals code switch a lot, some don't. Some bilinguals speak two languages that share similar form, others don't. But in all cases, bilinguals must negotiate a higher level of competition in their everyday use of language use than monolinguals. And it wouldn't surprise anyone if you really think about this, that you might think that sometimes for some conditions, we're going to see consequences of bilingualism, and for others, we're not. We're going to see variation in what those consequences are as a function of the way the two languages are regulated. And so we've seen that immersion in the second language is one example. I want to very, very quickly in the final part of my talk about some other properties of bilingualism, particularly social properties of bilingualism that may be important in really shaping the way these demands change the engagement of cognitive resources and shape these consequences of bilingualism. So what happens when bilinguals interact with one another? The truth is that we don't normally use the two languages in the way I've been talking about them in the laboratory, although I would argue to the wall that the laboratory does, in fact, simulate aspects of real life, and we can discuss that. But we typically use language in a very social context, and there are many processes that may affect regulation and the coordination of cognitive resources. So bilinguals code switch, or some bilinguals code switch. People live in social environments and they have social networks, so they may not speak both languages to all people. They may speak some languages to some people. They may speak some languages separately, and other people may live in environments where everyone is similarly bilingual and they speak the same two languages all the time. We've talked a little bit about immersion. And then there's an issue about linguistic diversity. So some people live in environments that are inherently diverse. They walk on the street and they hear many, many languages, regardless of whether they speak all of them. Other people may live in relatively homogeneous environments. So let's briefly consider some of these different contexts. Code switching bilinguals align to the speech of their interlocutors. And the metaphor that I've used is that code switching bilinguals are a little bit like tango dancers. They are like linguistic tango dancers. They align to one another. To code switch, you have to be in tune with the other person. You have to align to be able to have a very regular and regulated kind of interaction. We don't know a lot about the richness of how this tuning process occurs, but there's a lot of ongoing research in the field that's beginning to address this. And one study in our lab by Melinda Fricke looked at how well bilingual speakers who were code switching could anticipate what the person they're speaking with was going to, whether they were going to code switch or not, and basically showed that there are subtle features of their speech that predict whether a code switch is coming up. So speech rate slows down prior to a code switch. It may not necessarily be so available to your naked ear, but for Spanish-English bilinguals, English becomes a little more Spanish-like, and bilinguals use this subtle phonetic information to predict an upcoming switch. And see the work by Jorge Valdez-Croft and Julie Ducius on adaptive predictability. Bilinguals are very much in touch with who they're speaking with and how likely they are to code switch. Okay, so code switching is important, but not all bilinguals code switch, and there may be aspects of the context beyond code switching itself that may be important. And a study by Annie Beatty Martinez in 2020 tried to capture the different interactional contexts in different locations that might impose these demands on speakers. And what she did is she studied Spanish-English speakers, all of whom were highly proficient. In past research, they would have been considered aggregated into a single high proficiency Spanish-English speaker group. But what she did is she took them separately and looked at 3 different environments, thinking those 3 different environments differ in their contextual properties and might differ in how cognitive resources were engaged. She studied bilinguals in Granada, Spain, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and in State College, Pennsylvania. In Granada, Spain, bilinguals typically use Spanish and English separately. They may be proficient in both languages, but they don't code switch very much, and the 2 languages are used quite separately. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, the languages can be used opportunistically. They code switch a lot, and almost every person you speak with, you can make the assumption that they're going to speak both languages. In State College, Pennsylvania, which is a very monolingual English environment, someone who speaks Spanish is going to have to be on the lookout for Spanish speakers because there are not that many Spanish speakers in the environment, so they can't assume randomly that anyone they encounter is going to be able to speak Spanish with them. And what she did is to use a task, and again, in the spirit of going quickly and presenting a lot, I'm not going to go into the details, but this is a cognitive task to look at inhibitory control. It's called the AX-CPT, AX Continuous Performance Task, and I'm happy to talk about it later or offline with you. It's basically a task to capture whether you're predicting in advance or whether you're reacting to something that's been presented. And the question she asked in this study is, in these three different environments, do bilinguals differently engage proactive and reactive processes? And what they did in this experiment is they just simply named pictures again, very, very simple experiment. And the critical result, and again, I'm not going to go into the gory detail of the data, but just give you the essence of it. The essence is that the critical condition in this study was in State College, Pennsylvania. In State College, Pennsylvania, these Spanish-English bilinguals who were immersed in this monolingual English context were appearing to monitor their environment for people with whom they could speak Spanish. Those who had higher proactive control were able to maintain their Spanish, their L1, their dominant native language. They didn't lose Spanish. If you're proactive, you can maintain your native language. If you're reactive, you succumb to the environment and you become more English dominant. And so what we see is that people who are, from the category label we might use for these individuals, they're all Spanish-English bilinguals, they're all immersed in this English environment, but they differ as a function of how they engage these cognitive resources. And again, in previous research, they would have been aggregated into a single group. Here we see that they're actually quite different from one another. And what happens during language immersion? Well, we saw what happens during language immersion in the example that I gave you from Salamanca. In another study with Mandarin speakers immersed in State College, what we found was that, in fact, the L2 environment itself may function as accidental cognitive training. And so if you are immersed in English and you're a speaker of Mandarin, and there are not that many people who speak Mandarin around you, you've got to be working your brain like crazy to be proactive, to keep the Mandarin alive. And we see it in brain activity and we see it in behavior. So being immersed in a second language seems to tune proactive control. And where else do we see it? Well, this is a fabulous study that was done with code switchers of Spanish and English. It was done at University of Florida. It was an ERP study. And here's the main result. Again, I'm not going to take the time to go into all the gory details. You had a person who was reading sentences that were either code switched or not in English and Spanish. And sometimes there were code switch sentences that would have incurred a cost if you were if you were not expecting a code switch, and other sentences, not so much. But what they varied is they varied who was sitting with the person in the room. If the person was Spanish-English bilingual, the people whose brains were being monitored did not show the same costs in reading these sentences. Their brain activity didn't seem to reveal a cost. However, if a monolingual English speaker was sitting in the room with whom they could not code switch, they show a cost. And so what does that suggest? It suggests that within one and the same brain, it depends on the social context. It depends on who they're with. If they're with a potential code switching partner, it changes the story completely. So we need to pay attention to the variation in speakers and in the context in which they speak and read. Finally, a final example, and I will wrap up. We can ask the question about what the linguistic environment means. What does it mean to be in a linguistically diverse environment or in a very homogeneous environment? And this was a study with a serendipitous result for monolingual participants. And this was a study where Kinsey Bice, who had been a graduate student of mine at Penn State, came with me when I moved from Penn State to California. And she was right in the middle of her dissertation doing a learning study with bilinguals and monolinguals. And she had monolinguals who were monolingual speakers in both locations. But of course, in Pennsylvania, it's a very monolingual environment. In California, it's a very diverse environment. And what she did is she taught these these individuals finished vowel harmony, and I won't go into the reasons for that now, but here's the bottom line. The bottom line is that monolinguals living in linguistically diverse environments appear to be able to generalize new speech learning in ways that resemble bilinguals. In monolinguals living in this very monolingual homogeneous location in Pennsylvania do not. And so both groups are monolingual speakers of English, but the monolingual brains in linguistically diverse places are operating differently. They're operating a bit more bilingual-like, suggesting that there may be some advantages for new learning by having linguistic diversity in the larger context. Okay, just to wrap up here with a couple of final comments. How does this research address the consequences of bilingualism? Well, there's been a lot of discussion and argument and controversy about, are there really bilingual advantages? Are there really benefits of being bilingual? And the argument that we want to make is that the regulation of the native or dominant language may be very important in understanding how these consequences of bilingualism arise. And we've already seen that the way that regulation occurs is going to vary depending on who the speakers are and in different contexts. So the idea that some studies are not going to show these consequences and other studies are shouldn't be surprising at all, because it's going to depend on who they are as speakers and who they are as individuals who are embedded in particular social, cultural, linguistic contexts. And I want to make the point here that language immersion is not just about that too. We are all immersed. We need to characterize the linguistic properties for every single speaker, whether they're monolingual or bilingual, and whether we think they are in a situation where they're what we would have traditionally considered immersion in the L2. There are many studies in the literature that are good examples of what I would call the danger of oversimplification. This is a study that was done a few years ago in 2020. Bilingualism affords no general advantages. Population study of executive function, 11,000 people. That sort of blows your mind. Well, if you look at the study carefully, what you see is the way they characterize bilingualism, they ask people, are you bilingual? Yes or no? And what we know is that you can't do that. If you do that, you're aggregating over all the variation that is basically masking the true consequences of bilingualism. So bringing it together, I want to argue that we would know none of this if we just studied monolingual speakers. And many of these observations, I think, require a revision of traditional stories about language development, about cognitive control, and about the plasticity associated with language experience. We need to characterize the properties of language users and the context in which they learn and use two languages. It is not a simple matter of attaining proficiency. It is not a simple matter of age of acquisition, which have traditionally been the two measures that have been used to characterize bilinguals. And on the education, the implication is that the native language model is wrong. When two languages come in contact, they change themselves and they change each other. Now, very, very quickly, because as all of you know, those of us who live in the US are living under really, really quite a harsh political situation. And you hear all the time people talking about what does it mean that we now have this English only idea. And of course, we've had it for a long time. There's very persisting mythology in the US that impacts those who speak more than one language. This is a study by Serene and Luck that the blue map is the US. And what you see, the blue is not Democrat. The blue is the percentage of people who are have a non-English language at home. And you can see the blue is basically English only. And you see these hotspots around the country in the US where there are more people who, who do speak a home language other than English. And what we see is that in the US, it turns out that English-speaking adults who are fluent in another language acquired the non-English language at home. They are heritage speakers of of a language other than English. And so 75.5% of bilinguals in the US are heritage speakers. They are the least studied bilinguals, but they are the majority bilinguals in the US. And this is really where the research in this area is going. We need to characterize the consequences of early life experience, particularly for heritage speakers, for heritage learners. Heritage speakers often broker in childhood. They translate for their caregivers and beyond. They sometimes learn to read in their home language or in the societal language. Some of them have an opportunity for dual language immersion experience in school, some do not. And what's very dramatic is that if you look at the effect, and there's very reasons for optimism here, if you look at the consequences of dual language immersion doesn't just maintain the home language, which is a good thing. Dual language immersion actually benefits learning English in the US. And students who've been in dual language immersion not only have their home language maintained, but they also do better in English. So I want to end there by thanking everyone in my lab, including Macarena, who was a wonderful visitor to our lab a couple of years ago. We had the pleasure of having her with us, and everyone who has been working with us. This is not my work. This is work of a much, much larger group. And I just want to say that if you find yourself traveling, and I know people don't want to come to California right now, but if you find yourself there, please come visit us and let us know that you're there. We would love to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. I think I speak for everyone here. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So now we are opening the floor for questions. We're going to start with the audience here in the auditorium. So Nesta, raise your hand, is carrying a microphone. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and she will come to you. Here we have someone, Nesta.
Hello.
Judy.
Hello, Dr. Kroll.
Judy, can you hear?
I think I can, but why don't you state the question? That I'm not sure if I missed it.
So the question is that at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that there was a certain protection to the brain for bilinguals, right? Now, my question is this protection solely related to heritage speakers? And if not, what is the time frame for second language acquisition age in relation to these effects? Like, how long does it take for this protection to take place in the human brain?
Okay, that's a really good question, and I think it's something that is being studied. My sense from the literature is that we see protections and we see consequences even when there's been initial studies. Some of these effects come online pretty quickly. It's obviously going to be the case that people who have learned early and maintain the two languages are going to have more experience and therefore, more opportunities to have these consequences manifest across the lifespan. So I think that that there's going to be variation, but it's not just for heritage speakers. No, it's not just for early learners. There are some different effects that have been reported for early learners and differences in how the brain organization for the two languages. But the idea is that this trajectory of consequences can be seen even for individuals who are late learners of an L2.
Thank you, Judy. Do we have another question here in the audience? Roberto?
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Judith, for this great talk. I think it's been a really fantastic summary of all the research you've done and many other people as well in the realm of bilingualism. I have a few questions, or maybe I'll try to summarize it in one, maybe. And I would like you to comment a little bit more on the importance of context and on particularly on the latest research that you show about regulation. That's something relatively new to me. I haven't come across a lot of studies on regulation. And what's the role of regulation in comparison to other? Because I think the idea comes from executive functions, right? So this is sort of a concept that you've used in bilingualism, but it's part of a broader range of, let's say, executive functions, right? So I'd like you to explain a little bit more how you use that concept in bilingualism and whether the evidence so far is enough to actually talk about language regulation, or do we need studies that can more fine-grain the effect of regulation?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's a lot to say here, and there, obviously I've only touched on some illustrative examples. But here's the thing. I think that if you look at the research on the consequences of bilingualism, what you see is a very substantial research literature focused on primarily cognitive tasks. So you look at people who have particular type of dual language experience, and you ask, how does that affect their cognitive performance? And here, I think what we're doing that's different is that we're saying, look, we need to, if we really want to understand where these effects come from, it's got to be that sometimes when I give a talk, I make the sort of silly comment that bilingualism is about language. And so we need to look in language to say what's happening with language that is changing the way people are recruiting resources to use language. And that's a slightly different question than thinking about the consequences. And of course, they will relate to one another. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to understand how language itself is controlled, and the word control is sometimes used as well, to enable, to enable this fast-moving system that enables code switching, that enables highly proficient speech, that enables very, very proficient and quick comprehension. How do bilinguals engage cognitive and neural resources to allow that to occur, and then ask how those processes that result influence other cognitive mechanisms like executive function. And I think that we need to be very, very clear that the idea here is to try to begin in a very modest way to identify what we see as being the factors that we think may be causally related to these consequences. So not simply correlated, but causally related. And I think we're at a very early stage of being able to identify those. But I think that what's very promising is that we see that it's not just it's not just a simple set of tasks or tasks or simple word level processes. We see this at every level of language processing that we look, and I think that in terms of the comment you made at the very beginning about context, I think that what we see is how those cognitive resources are engaged and how this regulation mechanism works is either enabled or not by the context. So the example for, just one example is that individuals who are in a context where not many people speak one of their two languages have a very different cognitive challenge than individuals who are in a context where everyone speaks both languages. And so we think all of those factors, and we don't think, and we have to be very modest, because I think this is just an effort that's very much enterprise that's at the beginning. And what's remarkable is that when we investigate this, what we see are patterns that appear to be quite regular. They are not random, they are not noisy, they are quite regular. So we are encouraged by that, but we certainly don't yet think we have a complete story to tell.
Oh.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a great explanation. I think that it's the concept of regulation is quite promising, and there will be some debate, I think, whether this is language specific or is part of a broader set of skills. Thank you.
Yeah, I also will say that I do think that the claim that your L1 is really crucial is a fairly radical claim. And I think that, if you look at traditional linguistics, traditional psycholinguistics, the assumption was that the native language was something that was stable. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. Let's hear someone from Zoom now. Maybe. So
Can I ask a question? Can you hear me there?
Mhm.
So first, thank you for the insightful talk, Professor Crow. And I'd like to ask more to ask about cognitive control in like polyglots or individuals who speak 3 or more languages, or even hyperpolyglots, since all languages seem to be active in the brain simultaneously. And how do they manage this competition across multiple languages? And is there evidence that code switching becomes more efficient or strategically refined as the number of languages increases? So this is what I would like to know what I would like to know more about, like code switching when you speak like more languages, like in the case of polyglots and hyperpolyglots. This is my question, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just before you answer, I would like to add something, because my intervention is also something similar what has been asked. First of all, thanks a lot, Dr. Judith, for your wonderful presentation on this bilingualism. This approach, bidirectional and reversal, looking at the effect of L2 and L1 is really, is remarkable, and I really congratulate you for that. All this theory, all these explanations, the data which you have mentioned throughout the presentation was somehow related to bilingualism. This accommodation, adaptability, when you invite, you use the term that invitation of L2 by L1 so that this accommodation can take place. So there is always the dynamism between two languages. But what happens in a situation of multilingualism where we have 3 or more languages? In that case, what's the scenario remains the same? All the experiments which you are doing, do you think this adaptability, this reversal process, this code switching, how it will affect in a multilingual or maybe multicultural settings?
Okay, thank you. I think, okay, so first we have to say there are studies emerging on trilinguals, on multilingualism, but they're far fewer than those on bilingualism. And so I think we also have to be, modest about what sort of generalizations we come to. And I think my read of this, and not everyone may agree with me, but my read of it is that the basic mechanisms are the same. Remember that all humans, unless you know a secret that I don't know, all humans have 24 hours in the day. And so if you have 3 languages or 4 languages, you don't get more hours to use them. So you have a very different distribution of how and context, right? So you have more varied context and you have more diversity, which you might think, based on what I've said, would be very good for you in terms of all the arguments about resilience. But I think that there's nothing I know that suggests that the basic mechanisms theoretically are different. They may have different relations to one another in terms of the strength of the languages, and given the contextual cues for the languages and what you learn about being able to switch in and out of the languages. And again, and there are a number of studies that have appeared recently looking at trilingualism in particular. But I don't think that the results of those studies necessarily challenge the main point, right? There may be that it requires some elaboration. And one thing that's very important is that there's very little evidence that I know of and that suggests that in terms of consequences of bilingualism, that more is better. You might think, right, if you have 2, that's great, 3 would be terrific, 4 would be amazing, and so forth and so on. Well, I don't, and again, I think it's because I think that part of it is that the amount of data that we have available, but part of it is also that it's a different context, right? If you have multilingualism, you're going to have to really characterize a much more complex set of interactions. And I think that we haven't yet taken this approach to that in more than a few studies that have appeared in the literature. So I guess I would have to be convinced that that the mechanisms are really different. So you may see a different outcome if someone speaks more than 2 languages, but I think that I think especially for the learning studies. So the studies that seem to show that knowing 2 languages puts you in an advantaged situation with respect to learning a 3rd language. You might think the more languages people know, the better they would be at learning other languages because they've learned more, and they're navigating a larger set of potential conflicts across those languages. But again, I don't know of any evidence that suggests that the mechanisms are fundamentally different. But it's I agree, it's important. And I think the question is how to study it in a way that's sufficiently controlled so that you can come to these conclusions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. So due to time constraints, we are going to have to finish the Q&A section, but we thank Judy for her presentation. So give it up for Dr. Judith Kroll.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, guys, we will now take a short 20-minute break. Please feel free to step outside or stretch. We will continue with the students' presentation right after the break. So right now it's 11:36, so that means that you need to get back here by 11:56. Let's make it 5 to 12. We're going to have a cocktail reception at the end of the event. Okay, so maybe the students will share the location of the cafeteria with our guests, please. And I'll see you in 20 minutes. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. We are about to resume. So please take a seat and pay attention. We now move on to a special segment of this forum, student-led seminars, which showcase the academic efforts and critical thinking of future educators. The presentations you are about to see were developed by students in their final semester of the English language teaching program for secondary education. As part of the class Educational Topics, student-led seminars, each group selected a topic related to bilingualism and worked on it throughout the semester. They carried out small-scale systematic reviews. For those unfamiliar with this type of work, a systematic review is a structured and rigorous approach to examining existing research on a particular theme. It involves identifying, analyzing, and synthesizing evidence from multiple studies using clear inclusion criteria and a replicable process. In this case, students applied this method on a smaller scale, appropriate for undergraduate research, allowing them to explore complex issues in a critical and evidence-based way. We have divided the student presentations into two thematic blocks. The first round focuses on well-established areas of bilingualism research, topics that have been extensively explored over the past 2 decades. These presentations offer insights into what we might call the classical foundations of bilingualism studies. Let's begin with our first presentation. We invite Nesta Arriaza, Laura González, and Isaac Villa to present their seminar on cognitive advantages of bilingualism.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to be here. And today we are going to present about cognitive benefits of bilingual brains. This is our small-scale systematic review. Okay, we are
Laura González,
Isaac Villa,
and Nesta Arriaza. This small-scale systematic review was supervised by Dr. Matarena Karsevsky. Thank you for your support.
Okay, while some research link bilingualism to improve executive functions and creativity, other studies report mixed or inconsistent results. So in this poster, we try to explore this contrasting perspective and examine how factors like language proficiency and context influence the cognitive effects of bilingualism. In order to better support the ideas behind this research, it is important to look at the concept that shapes its foundation. One of them is the executive functions. This refers to a set of cognitive processes that support goal-oriented behavior. And according to Miyake, this is divided into 3 key components: the inhibition or inhibitory control, the shifting, also known as cognitive flexibility, and the updating or working memory. But before moving on, it is important to mention the questions that guide our poster, which are there cognitive advantages of bilingualism, and what are the cognitive advantages provided by bilingualism?
Thank you, Zach. When it comes to our methodology, our guiding framework was inspired by Prima's 2020 framework, where our inclusion and exclusion criteria were 4. There must be only empirical studies, also published in peer-reviewed journals, related to the cognitive benefits of bilingualism, and also in Scopus or WOS. And an inclusion that is only studies published from 2000 on. The sources or search strategies that we used were 3: Google Scholar, Scopus, and Clarivate, with the keywords bilingualism and benefits, bilingualism and cognitive advantages and benefits, and also bilingualism and executive functions. The selection process, the total numbers of initial results was 755, and the feature steps are 3. The first with the title screening, 7 of them were rolled out. Abstract review 45, and also with full text were 5. And in this small-scale systematic review, we include only 5 studies. The type of analysis are 2. The first is the comparative analysis and also a descriptive summary. Both of them reveals patterns, contradictions, and also trends among these studies, showing both similarities and difference between the debate of bilingualism and cognition.
Thank you, Nesta. Well, the results are the following. 80% of the studies we used indicated that there are cognitive advantages provided by bilingualism, and 20% indicated that there are not. So what are the cognitive advantages provided by bilingualism, according to these studies? So this is our graph. In the y-axis, we have level of cognitive advantage, which measures how strong is the scientific evidence provided about cognitive advantage provided by bilingualism. So the possible values here are the following: 3 for clear advantage, 2 for mixed results, advantage and disadvantages, and 1 for not advantages or disadvantages. Below we have the bars, which means the analyzed categories. The first one is selective attention. In this case, most of the studies indicated that there are cognitive advantages. In this case, then inhibitory control, the value was 2. These indicate that there are mixed results. Some studies indicated that there are cognitive advantages. Others indicated that there are not cognitive advantages. And one study was inconclusive. For working memory, we have value of 1. In this case, most of the studies indicated that there are no cognitive advantages, and one of them indicated that there was a disadvantage. For lexical access, there was also a value of 1. In this case, most of the studies indicated that there are no cognitive advantages, and one of them indicated that advantages are probably missed. So for competent thinking, we have a value of 3. In this case, the authors indicated that that the advantages are there, specifically in inhibitory control. For divergent thinking, there was also some values, but 3. This indicated that there was advantages related to cognitive flexibility. And for language mode, finally, we have that the study demonstrated that one of them indicated that demonstrated that I can't. Sorry. As a conclusion, we can say that bilingualism can express in different ways. This depends on how well the people speak the language and also the context. For some studies, there are not so clear results. So scientists are not really sure about how bilingualism can affect or not the brain.
And how can we apply this to our EFL classroom? Bilingualism can strengthen important skills like innovation, flexibility, and attention, and those abilities are keys for learning. And also teachers can support it through different activities in the classroom that involve switching languages, focusing attention, and problem solving. In this QR, you can find all the reference we used to our small scale systematic review. And that was all our presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Thank you to our first group for that insightful presentation. So because of time constraints, we are not receiving questions, but I'm pretty sure my students are going to be more than happy to answer all of your questions during the coffee reception prepared for you at the end of the event. Now we're going to move on and we're going to welcome Juan Jose Faúndez, Paula Palma, and Andrés Urrutia, who will present the review on bilingualism and Alzheimer's disease.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juan José Faúndez, and together with my classmates Paula Palma and Andrés Urrutia, we are going to present our small-scale review. The title of our work is a bidirectional approach on bilingualism and Alzheimer's disease. In this study, we wanted to explore two things. First, how being bilingual can delay Alzheimer's, and second, how the Alzheimer's affect the bilingual people. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. It affects millions of people around the world. Because of that, some research says that speaking two languages may help protect the brain. It could delay the symptoms by increasing what is called cognitive research, but not all the studies agree with this. Also, most of them only look at how bilingualisms affect the Alzheimer's. Few studies talk about the other side, how the disease affects the bilingual people, especially the language and thinking skills. So for our theoretical background, please go on. For theoretical background, we consider four main ideas. First, Alzheimer's is a disease that causes problems with memory, language, and mental control. Second, cognitive research means that the brain can keep working even if it's damaged. Third, bilingual people use two languages every day. This helps improve the attention, control, and flexibility, so it may support the cognitive research. And fourth, the Alzheimer's affects bilingual people. It usually damages the second language more than the first because the second one is used less and is less automatic. So based on this, we asked these two research questions. The first one is, how does bilingualism influence the onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease? And the second is, how does Alzheimer's disease affect cognitive function and language use in bilingual individuals?
Methodology. We conducted this systematic review following PRISMA 2020 guidelines. Our initial search, Yale 2016 studies from Google Scholar, PubMed, and SEAL, using keywords such as bilingualism and Alzheimer's onset. After applying exclusion and exclusion criteria, we selected 5 relevant studies, and our study is main focus on 2 main themes: how bilingualism influences Alzheimer's, and how Alzheimer's affects bilingualism.
Let's now take a look at the results. Bilinguals were diagnosed 3 to 5 years later than monolinguals, suggesting they compensate longer before symptoms appear. This is likely due to cognitive reserve. Studies also showed that bilinguals showed relative strengths in executive functions like inhibition and conflict resolution. However, these advantages were not consistent across all executive tasks. Bilingual patients also showed more widespread hypometabolism, which is reduced brain activity, yet perform as well or better than monolinguals on cognitive tasks, suggesting they relied on alternative neural networks to maintain function. And in relation to language, bilinguals tend to lose access to their second language earlier and more severely than their first language. Patients showed increased code switching, were finding difficulties, and greater interference in their second language.
Conclusion: in summary, there is a bidirectional relationship between Alzheimer's disease and bilingualism. On one hand, bilingualism delayed the Alzheimer's onset by 3 to 5 years due to improved executive control and cognitive reserve. On the other hand, Alzheimer's affects second language more severely due to its low usage frequency and low automatization. But obviously, there is a need for further rigorous research on this topic. As an application, it is essential to support both native and second language in our bilingual students to support and support their native culture, their native language, and develop cognitive things, cognitive development. Additionally, exercises like metalinguistic activities or code switching games can enhance their cognitive functions, highlighting the need of that kind of exercises. So that was our presentation. Thank you for hearing us. Here you can see your references, and thank you.
Thank you guys for that thoughtful contribution. Next, we invite Diego Cerda, José González, and Víctor Porciúncula to share their work on advantages and disadvantages of dual language exposure. Yeah, you can sit, guys in the back, you can sit. Yeah, there are some seats here in the middle. Before we guys start, maybe you want to take a seat. You can also sit here at the front or here in the second row. Yes. Okay, do you have the pointer? Okay, guys, good luck.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diego Cerda, and alongside my fellow students, José González and Víctor Porciúncula, we are going to present our poster named Dual Language Exposure in Bilingual Children, a small-scale systematic review. This poster was supervised by our teacher, Dr. Magdalena Karstevsky. Well, as a brief introduction, dual language exposure is a common experience in many children, but its effect in language development are still debated. For this reason, this small systematic review examines what are those effects, if they are negatives or positive. The research questions we made for this are the following. Is dual language exposure always beneficial? And how does dual language exposure affect bilingual children? The theoretical framework we made for this are the following. Dual language development framework. This, according to Genesi et al. In 2004, bilingual children develop two languages through unique paths, shaped by the quality and amount of exposure. The second one is dynamic system theory. According to Herdin and Gessner in 2002, language development is shaped by internal and external factors, where both languages interact each other over the time. And the third one is threshold hypothesis. According to Cummins in 1976, he proposed that the cognitive and academic advantages only appear after children reach a certain level of proficiency in both languages. Below that threshold, benefits may not appear. This framework is important because explain why not all children benefit equally in the different studies.
Okay, hello. Okay, perfect. So what about the methodology? In the first instance, I have to mention that this small-scale systematic review was inspired by the PRISMA framework. In this way, we also have some inclusion and exclusion criteria, where we choose only empirical articles that are, first, related to bilingual and multilingual teaching in children's age from 0 up to 6.5 years old, and also second, indexed in a Scopus. Also, talking about the time frame, those studies have to meet the time frame that starts in 2002 and ends in 2023. Go ahead. So now, what about the sources and search strategy that we use? In the first instance, the sources. Well, the sources that we use were first Scopus, then ResearchGate and PubMed. And the search strategy that we applied was the use of keywords. Keywords such as first, dual language exposure, and children, and of course, dual language exposure benefits and disadvantages. Go ahead. This led us to the selection process. Well, as you may see here, in a first instance, in the selection process, we started with a total of 683,000 results. But after applying some featuring steps such as title, review, abstract, results, and full text review, we conclude with a total of just 10 results. Go ahead. Oh, it's the type of analysis. Okay, my bad. Well, the comparative analysis in this study highlights the differences across the studies, especially in terms of vocabulary development and assessment methods. And actually, the descriptive summary gave us the tools to identify those patterns and gaps for future studies or research. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's answer our critical questions. Is dual language exposure always beneficial? Well, initially, bilingual children may lag in single language measures, but this isn't the full picture. We have to analyze their complete linguistic framework to know what they are learning across both languages. When we talk about conceptual vocabulary, bilingual children often score lower when tested in one language. This is because they divide their learning experience across two languages. They are learning the same concepts, but in two different languages. This is where bilingual children often score higher. When we talk about total vocabulary, we talk of the words that they learn on both languages. This means that when they learn a new concept, this often comes with two new words. Okay, so this timeline, shows the importance of timing. By 22 months, bilingual children know fewer words in one language, but by the 30 months, bilingual reach the level of monolingual children and maybe can even surpass them in the total amount of words that they know between the both languages. This gives us three key insights. Bilingualism isn't a handicap, just a different cognitive pathway. Single language measure don't give us the full picture of the vocabulary of the children. And with the correct support, bilingual children could develop unique linguistic advantages.
Okay, and as a conclusion, bilingualism is a complex phenomenon that affects the development of vocabulary in children. But that doesn't mean that it's negative. Even if the results show that bilingual children have lower vocabulary than monolinguals, that doesn't mean that's something negative. And the benefits they have more benefits during the time, not just related to vocabulary, but cognitive and academic. The critical findings we have for this are the following. The exposure quality drives optimal development. It's really important to have really a good quality of exposure when you are learning a second language. Dual language assessment provide accurate ability measurement. We use not to assess with one language, but two languages. Bilingualism offers cognitive benefits without delays, as I mentioned before. The application in the classrooms are use comprehensive language evaluation, as I mentioned, support heritage language maintenance, and not erase the first language when you are working with the two languages. Involve family in supporting home language use. This is really important to have a good quality of exposure for our children. And employ research-based bilingual teaching methods. This was our presentation. Here are the reference and our contacts if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, guys. Thank you to all the three groups for this rich and well-informed presentations. We now continue with the second round of student-led seminars. While the first block focused on classical and well-established areas of bilingualism research, this second block explores emerging and contemporary themes. These topics reflect the growing diversity and complexity of bilingual experiences in today's world. Let's begin with our next presentation. We invite Catalina Gutierrez and Lorenzo Soto to present the review on bilingualism and mental health.
Good afternoon, everyone. This research poster presents how does bilingualism affect mental health, a small-scale systematic review. This study was done under the guidance of Dr. Macarena Garcet. My name is Lorenzo Soto.
And I'm Catalina Gutierrez.
And this study investigates the relationship between bilingualism and mental health. Its goal is to understand how the use of two or more languages may influence an individual's psychological state. While bilingualism usually studied for its cognitive and educational benefits and outcomes, its importance on mental health remains less explored. This study seeks to contribute to this emerging area of research by reviewing existing literature and identifying key themes and gaps. Moving forward to the theoretical framework, mental health refers to a person's overall psychological well-being. It includes emotional stability, daily functioning, and the presence or severity of any psychiatric symptom. Language brokering refers to the act of children translating for their family members in different situations. Situations are often complex or even stressful. The research question guiding this investigation is how does bilingualism affect mental health? This aims to explore the possible connection between speaking more than one language and an individual psychological state. Next, the methodology. Let me explain the guiding framework. This small-scale systematic review was inspired by PRISMA 2020 guidelines, which helped ensure a clear and structural review process. For the inclusion and exclusion criteria, we only consider empiric articles that were published in a peer-reviewed journal, directly related to the bilingualism and mental health topic, and indexed into databases such as Scopus and Web of Science. Next, sources and research strategy. We search on databases such as RIC, CLO, Google Scholar, ResearchGate, using the keywords bilingualism and mental health. For the selection process, we started with 198 initial results. After a reading process, screening titles, and reviewing abstracts, only 3 studies met all the criteria and were included in the final review, concluding with a total of 5 papers. Finally, the type of analysis, we use a comparative approach, providing a descriptive summary of the findings.
And now we are going with the results. So here in the results, you have the first visual aid, that is overall impact of bilingualism on mental health. We have 3 main ways of impact. In this case, positive, negative, and mixed impact. The mixed impact talks about code switching. Code switching is when bilingual speakers are experiencing stressful situations with intense emotions. And in this case, they tend to code switch or switch to the language they feel more comfortable. And in this case, they feel more comfortable with the first language, the heritage language, right? So when this happens, they can express the emotions better, naturally, because they have total management of this language. It's not the same for the second language, for example. And this occurs that when they are expressing their emotions in the second language, this creates an emotional distance because they have a lack of a total management of this language. And this may be seen something bad, but it's not, because code switching can act as a emotional regulation strategy. So in this case, for bilingual speakers, it's very helpful. It's part of the positive impact that also gives us cognitive flexibility. In contrast with language brokering, this is not the same. Language brokering can be very dangerous for bilingual speakers. So in this case, its severity, it can be seen in this visual aid, for example. One of the highest results in this visual aid is language brokering. So language brokering is when bilingual speakers are experiencing these situations, complicated situations where they are interpreting or translating for their parents at an early age, 9 to 13 years old, even younger, or up to 18, 20 years old. So in these situations, They are translating for the parents, okay? So in these situations, they are complicated situations because are translating financial situations or medical situations, and in this case, this is under their knowledge because of their age. So in this case, this have a very negative impact because without the adequate emotional accompaniment from their parents, this can cause us on them high levels of anxiety, high levels of stress, and even can cause depression. In contrast with the second and third results that we have here, we have the code switching that give us an emotional regulation strategy, which is very good, very helpful for bilingual speakers. And the third result is higher psychiatric symptoms. In bilingual speakers, experience also something that is the language proficiency. When they do not manage one or both languages at all, totally, they tend to have higher psychiatric symptoms. But language proficiency also tell us that a balanced bilingualism can act as a protective factor for mental health in bilingual speakers and can favors emotional integration and better emotional regulation. So in our conclusion, this is very important. These results are very important for us as teachers in EFL teaching. We must be, as teachers, we must be aware of and be very mindful about our students' emotional experiences with language. Creating a supportive and low anxiety environment in the classroom can help the students feel safer, more confident, and most important, better equipped to succeed emotionally and academically. Now we are getting to the end of this presentation, and I cordially invite you to scan the QR code where you are going to find the 5 papers that made this poster possible. In the meantime, if you want to scan, in the meantime, we want to express our sincere gratitude to our families and all those who supported us throughout this process, and a special thanks to Dr. Macarena Karczewski for her invaluable guidance. And this was our presentation. Thank you very much to you.
Thank you guys for your thoughtful work. Next, we welcome Javiera Viera, Elizabeth Saldaña, and Spencer Silva, who will speak on bilingualism and emotion.
Hello. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Hello. In today's presentation, our research poster is titled Exploring the Emotional Benefits of Multilingualism and a Small-Scale Systematic Review. I am Elizabeth Saldaña with my colleague Javiera Viera and Spencer Silva. We are going to present to you our research poster. The topic is language and emotions. And this investigation was guided by our mentor, Dr. Macarena Karczewski. And we are going to start with our research question. As I told you before, this research poster was based in the topic of language and emotions. Our research question says, how does using L1 versus L2 affect the different expressions, emotional expressions, and perceptions of the bilingual speakers? Next, we have the theoretical framework that in this case, we select in total 5 main papers. All of them have to be with language and emotions. First of all, I want to take something clear. The most important key concept is EC. In this case, it's emotional competences. It has to mean with all these kind of abilities that the speaker can have to solving problems, to regulate their own emotions, and to use these emotions in certain situations. We also have to know that during this investigation, we understand and validate the idea of bilinguals and use the language not only to shape their communication, but also to understand their own emotional experiences and also with their identity. There is also important to mention that speakers can usually use their L1 to be more authentic and emotional. But by the other hand, they use their L2 to create some barriers and to keep regulate their external emotion and feelings. Also, it's important to mention that language helps us to adapt across the cultural experiences, because in different contexts, they can get more knowledge in difference of the language and their own emotions.
So to guide this small-scale review, we use the Prisma 2020 framework as inspiration. And although this is not a full systematic review, we applied key principles such as transparent selection, structured synthesis, and evidence-based analysis. So we focus on empirical peer-reviewed journal articles that were directly related to the seminar topic, specifically bilingual and multilingual English teaching. And to ensure academic quality, we only included articles that were indexed in Scopus of Web of Science, and we excluded reviews and opinion pieces. And the databases we use included Google Scholar, Cambridge Core, and Cielo. And our search keywords were combinations like bilingualism and emotion, multilingualism and emotional development, language and emotional expression, and language and emotion. We also limit the research frame to articles published between 2013 and 2024. So our initial research produced around 126,000 results, our initial search. And we also began by filtering the studies by reviewing the abstracts. And our final studies were 5, in which we included for in-depth analysis. We also conducted a thematic synthesis approach, organizing the findings around themes such as emotional shifts across language, language choice in emotional expressions, and emotional competence and multilingualism. We also applied a comparative analysis and a descriptive summary to present the main insights from these studies.
In terms of the results, it was found that people who are balanced bilinguals, meaning that they speak both languages clearly, are better at understanding and managing emotions. Also that the L1 feels more authentic and more emotionally intense, and that it is deeply connected to a person's identity, to their early emotional experiences, and to the spontaneous expressions. In contrast, the L2 creates emotional distance, but it helps emotional regulation, meaning that people can control their emotions better. It is often used strategically, meaning that it is used in formal or sensitive situations, but it may feel less natural. And depending on how well a person speaks the language, this will have an impact on their emotional expression. Switching between cultures and not just the language is also important, since if a person knows how to act or think differently, depending on the culture, on the language they're using, this will help them become more emotionally flexible. The bar graph shown on the poster presents 3 emotional aspects: emotional competence, emotional expression, and emotional influence. In the agreement sections, you can see that most studies agree that bilingualism supports emotional and cultural understanding. In the contradiction sections, you can see that the bars are lower, showing a disagreement across studies regarding how bilingualism affects emotion and how culture shapes these emotions. And in the new insights aspect, you can see that the cultural influence bar is higher, showing that recent research studies highlight the importance that culture has on emotional experiences. These results suggest that people who are bilingual can benefit emotionally from using both languages, but the way they feel and express their emotions will depend on the language they use, their fluency, and their cultural background. In conclusion, bilingualism can help aspects such as emotional regulation or emotional granularity, but it doesn't automatically improve overall emotional competence. Also, in order to apply it to an EFL classroom, we need to have some considerations in mind. First of all, we need to help students to become fluent in both languages in order to improve their emotional skills. Secondly, English shouldn't be taught just in an academic context, but we should also include emotional and cultural learning. Thirdly, since the L1 feels more authentic, this should be the language that the students use when talking about their feelings. And in order to do this, the teachers should create safe environments and safe spaces in which students can decide which language they want to use when sharing their feelings. We should also embrace students' backgrounds to boost their confidence and their emotional skills. And finally, teachers should use creative activities such as storytelling, journaling, and role play in order to connect emotions to languages and cultures.
Finally, we would like to thank our teacher, Dr. Macarena, for her constant guidance and support throughout this entire project.
And you can scan that QR code to find the references and the papers that we use to make this poster possible. That was our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for sharing your thoughtful work. We now invite Trinidad Cisterna and Fernanda Norambuena to present our seminar, Bilingual Identity and Self-Perception.
Good afternoon, dear audience. This is Fernanda Norambuena and Trinidad Cisterna, and today we are going to present our small-scale systematic review called How Does Speaking Two Languages Shape Who We Are? Of course, under the guidance of Dr. Macarena Karczewski.
Okay, speaking more than one language does more than expand communication. It actually shapes who we are. Research shows that bilingual individuals often choose aspects of their identity, such as personality and emotions. Exploring this connection helps us to understand how bilingual individuals navigate and construct a flexible sense of self. This underscores the need to further explore how identity is shaped in bilingual contexts, especially in educational settings.
Now, let's move to our theoretical framework. In our poster, we explain the concept of identity as how individuals see themselves and are seen by others. This is influenced by culture, language, and social context.
Our research question was, how does speaking two languages shape individual identity?
Our methodology. This small-scale systematic review was conducted following the principles of PRISMA 2020 framework, which provided a structured approach to identifying, screening, and selecting relevant studies. Inclusion criteria. All empirical studies published in peer-reviewed journals focus on bilingualism and identity, also indexed in Scopus or Web of Science. Sources and search strategy. Searches were conducted in Google Scholar and Scopus using the keyword bilingualism and identity. Selection process. An initial pool of 2,400 results was narrowed through title screening, abstract review, and full text reading. A total of 6 studies met all criteria and were included in the final review.
Our type of analysis was thematic synthesis, comparative analysis, relevance to EFL teaching, and descriptive summary.
Now we have the results. The data show clear evidence of cultural frame switching. Participants reported feeling and behaving differently depending on the language spoken. Spanish elicited more collectivist traits, emotional warmth, sympathia, and direct communication, while English prompted confidence, directness, and focus on personal goals. Several participants even felt like slightly different people in each language, highlighting how language can activate distinct cultural mindset and influence identity.
Language dominance and cultural affiliation.
First, Janola and colleagues in 2025 found that people actually describe their personality differently depending on the language they're using. This is not random, it's related to which language they felt more identified with. For example, participants with a stronger US identity show higher levels of extroversion and consciousness, while in the other hand, participants with a stronger Hispanic identity show higher levels of agreeableness in both English and Spanish. So let me briefly explain to you what these personality traits means according to Big Five inventory. So, extroversion means being outgoing, talkative, and energetic. Consciousness is about being organized, responsible, and careful. Agreeableness is about being kind, empathetic, and sensitive to other feelings. So, this study tells us that language doesn't just influence how we sound, it also influences how we see ourselves and how we behave depending on the cultural values side to the language we feel more identified with. Language choice reflects emotional identity. This study was conducted by Bakic and Skifik in 2017 and it's more focused to the emotional side of the language. They found that bilingual individuals choose different languages depending on what they want to express. For instance, if they want to talk about something more private or deeply personal, they might prefer the language they learn first or the one they associate with family or childhood.
Many participants said they felt more emotionally authentic in one language than the other, like they could express themselves more naturally or honest. This shows us that language is not only a tool for communication, but also closely tied to memory, emotions, and personal experiences.
So, overall, this study tells us that bilingual identity is flexible and deeply influenced by culture and emotional connections. It's not just about being able to speak two languages, it's about living within two different ways of seeing and feeling the world.
Finally, we have the section of conclusion. The results of this study reveal that bilingual identity is flexible and dynamic. Participants experience shift in personality, emotions, and self-perception depending on the language they used.
This reflects how each language is tied to different cultural values and ways of being.
This has important implications for EFL teaching. If language activates different aspects of identity, then teaching should go beyond grammar and vocabulary. Classrooms need to be culturally rich and emotionally supportive, allowing learners to express themselves authentically in English. By recognizing the cultural and emotional dimension of language, we can help students not just learn English, but live it as part of who they are.
We would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Macarena, who shows the delightful world of bilingualism and this interesting connection between bilingualism and identity that we will definitely like to keep studying this field and doing some research, especially in an educational setting.
Thank you for your respectful attention.
Thank you, girls, for that very interesting presentation. And finally, we welcome Cristian Parragués, Rodrigo Santis, and Adrián Naranjo, who will share their findings on personality and second language acquisition.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cristian Parragués, and I'm joined by my classmates, Rodrigo Santis and Adrián Naranjo. And today we're going to present to you our research poster, To What Extent Does Personality Influence the Way You Acquire a Second Language? This was done under the guidance of Dr. Macarena Karczewski. This small-scale systematic review analyzes the way in which different personality traits, such as L2 grid, introversion and extroversion, and foreign language and anxiety, influence the way learners acquire a second language? And it seeks to answer the following research question, same as the title. To what extent does personality influence the way you acquire a second language?
Now we are going to review our theoretical framework section. Here we are going to define the following concepts. First, second language acquisition. Ellis defines second language acquisition as the way in which people learn a language other than their mother tongue, inside or outside the classroom. Second, we have personality. Funder refers to personality as an individual's characteristic patterns of thought, behavior, and emotion, together with the psychological mechanisms, hidden or not, behind those patterns. In other words, personality affects choices, preferences, and ideas, which means that it will also leave a mark on the process of learning a language. Then we have extroversion and introversion. Ehrman and Oxford found that extroverts employ more affective and visualization strategies, while introverts found to be slow to initiate or respond to conversations because they are usually concerned about meaning and context. Then we have L2 grid. Taimuri et al. Define L2 grid as a combination of perseverance and passion for long-term and higher-order goals. It is stated to be a strong predictor for success in second language acquisition, or SLA. Finally, we have foreign language anxiety, which, according to Horowitz, is a distinct complex of self-perceptions, beliefs, feelings, and emotions related to language learning.
This small-scale systematic review was inspired by the PRISMA framework, as it follows basic principles, such as transparent pair selection, structured synthesis, and evidence-informed review. We only included empirical articles that were published in peer-reviewed journals, indexed in Scopus, and directly related to personality and second language acquisition. We use Google Scholar and Scopus as databases, establish personality, second language acquisition, extroversion, and introversion as keywords, and use Boolean operators to look for papers. An example of this is introversion and extroversion and SLA. That gave us the number of 8,450 results. So we had to do a filtering process, which entailed title screening, abstract review, and full text reading, which led us to the final number of 5 studies, which are the ones included in this presentation. Finally, we did a thematic synthesis and a scripted summary.
Now let's head to the results sections. First, let's answer our research question. To what extent does personality influence the way you acquire a second language? Now, the results show that personality does influence how learners acquire a language in a meaningful way. Now, it is very important to define that how meaningful will depend on how second language acquisition is being defined, measured, and situated, since changes in a case-by-case basis. As you can see in the graph, 40% of the study showed a strong influence of personality, 40% showed moderate influence, and only 20% showed weak to no influence. Now, there is no general consensus in what this research refers to as second language acquisition. So a distinction was made. Second language acquisition as long-term goals and second language acquisition as academic achievements. Now, these graphs go from 1 to 3. 1 being weak to no influence, and 3 being a strong influence. It is very important to notice that the only study that showed weak to no influence was a study conducted in 1998 in a grammar translation-based classroom.
Now, let's move to the conclusion section. The 5 studies show that personality and emotional factors do have an impact on second language acquisition. Among the papers we analyzed as a group, there is no agreement upon a definition of personality and second language acquisition. However, the studies highlight specific personality traits, that play a relevant role in the SLA process. Extroversion may help developing speaking skills and engaging in social interactions, though its advantages are not consistent across all contexts. Introverts can excel in listening tasks more than extroverts. Besides, they tend to use more cognitive, planning, and self-monitoring strategies. L2 grit supports persistence in learning, while anxiety, which is considered to be a strong predictor in academic success, can hinder progress. Language learning depends not just on intelligence or test scores, but also on motivation, emotion, and other personality traits, such as perfectionism and self-confidence.
When it comes to the application in the EFL classroom, the first thing that we would like to point out is that we teachers should always look to adapt our teaching practices according to the different classroom contexts and students' personalities. If we identify students with an extroverted personality, we should provide more speaking-oriented opportunities so they can talk. If we identify students who are introverted, give them more cognitive-oriented tasks. If we identify students with L2 grit, use that and engage them in the class. And also, we should always be looking for mitigating the foreign language anxiety in the classroom, both in class instruction and text context. Another important thing that we would like to point out is that students may struggle to use all the available learning strategies if we teachers adhere to rigid teaching methods, as Christian said. And this final idea led us to the final reflection, which is, even though we are instructed in the communicative approach, we may not be able to see positive results if we adhere to the Chilean EFL teaching culture, which relies heavily on the grammar translation method. Finally, we would like to acknowledge Ms. Magdalena Karczewski again, to whom we extend our gratitude for her clarity, for her support, and also for organizing this seminar. Thank you very much. That was our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, guys, and thank you to all presenters for their dedication, insight, and academic rigor. To close this segment of the forum, we are pleased to present a new academic publication that contributes to the broader conversation on language education in Chile. This book is titled La enseñanza de lenguas y culturas originarias, desafíos y oportunidades para la educación del siglo XXI, or The Teaching of Indigenous Languages and Cultures, Challenges and Opportunities for 21st Century Education. This timely volume addresses the intersection of language, identity, and intercultural education, offering a critical look at the role of indigenous languages in contemporary pedagogical practice. It brings together voices from different disciplines and educational settings to highlight both the challenges and the transformative potential of multilingual, culturally responsive education. The book has been edited by Catherine Diaz Vargas, Dr. Cristian Sangüesa Campos, and Dr. Elizabeth Quintrileo Yancao. Today, we are honored to have all the three editors with us to share the main ideas, reflections, and motivations behind this important publication. Please join me in welcoming Professors Catherine Diaz Vargas, Cristian Sangüesa Campos, and Elizabeth Quintrileo Yancao.
Hello. Yes. Good afternoon. We're gonna sit down. Hope you can see us if we're sitting. All right. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Catherine Diaz Vargas. I'm here today with my colleagues and co-editors, Dr. Cristian Sangüesa and Dr. Elizabeth Quintrileo, to present to you our newly published book, which is this one that you can see here. The name is in Spanish. It's called La enseñanza de lenguas y culturas originarias, desafíos y oportunidades para la educación del siglo XXI. So thank you, first of all, for inviting us, for having us today. It's been a great journey today with all the presentations. They're all very interesting. So we're pleased to be here to share this with you as well. All right, so we are here, as I said before, I'm gonna move a little bit, to present this book, which is newly published 2 weeks ago. It has 10 chapters, it has different sections, and this is the structure of the presentation that we have today for you. So first of all, Dr. Sangüesa is going to talk about the background in which we published the book. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the editorial process, the different steps. And finally, Dr. Quintrileo will talk about the cultural significance of this book. We have initially thought about a Q&A section, but I don't know. This is more or less the structure.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. Thank you for staying. I know it's rather late in the day already. It's lunchtime. We're probably a bit hungry. But thank you for staying. And thank you for also joining us in this effort of sharing this publication with you. You might be wondering why we're here working on this particular topic, since we're primarily educators of future educators of English. I teach at an English teaching program of a traditional university here in Chile, same as my colleagues. Elizabeth teaches English at UBB, and Catherine and I teach English to future teachers of English at UDEC. It's a little serendipitous the way we actually first came in contact with people from the territory, from RALCO, because we are stationed at Los Angeles campus, which is near Alto Biobío. And the origin of this book has to do with our interest in placing our future teachers in their teaching practicums in Alto Biobío. We wanted them to have an experience teaching English in the territory, being exposed to heritage languages, and of course, trying to do something to preserve and revitalize the teaching of heritage languages. And so we succeeded. Some of our students went to RALCO to do their teaching practicums, and our collaboration with RALCO and the territory began. And an opportunity came to collaborate to organize the first seminar that took place in RALCO, in the territory, with specialists of different universities to teach, to talk about ways in which we could preserve and help continuing teaching and preserving heritage languages and their cultures. So we belong to an interdisciplinary research group, and we took on the invitation. Our group is called HIE. And then, can you go back one? Go back, please, just one. And then we came up with this seminar called Inaduam Dungo Kimelal Kivun Pewen Mapuni Kivun Che, or something like in Spanish, retomando la enseñanza de la lengua materna del territorio mapuche. And so there is bilingualism there. The only difference is that for them, their mother tongue is Cheungun and their second language is Spanish. For us, Spanish is our first language or mother tongue, and English would be our additional language or second language. In this case, our foreign language, right? And so people from the communities that are already bilingual and eventually learn English are actually plurilingual, right? Multilingual. And so this book is kind of up your alley, right? Because today is basically happening under the umbrella of psycholinguistics and bilingualism, plurilingualism. But I think this book is also relevant because its contribution also alludes to bilingualism, plurilingualism, of course, also linked with the socio-cultural perspective and interculturality, which these days is very, very relevant for teachers of a language, right? Because, you know, languages help preserve culture as well. So we see there traditional educators. I'm using the term as a calque because in Spanish we say educadores tradicionales, but in English, probably a more proper term would be like, I don't know, community elders or Mapuche educators, right? And knowledge keepers, language carriers. But I'll use the term traditional educators for this purposes. So if we move on, then, okay, the HIE and the people in RALCO associated for this seminar. And we actually attended it. It happened in November 2022. And the organizers asked us, what's a way in which we could actually have a concrete evidence, a concrete piece of evidence that this seminar happened in the territory? And so we first thought of proceedings. Okay, let's actually publish conference proceedings. Then we rethought that and came up with the idea of a book. And we said, then why not extend this to a major or to a bigger endeavor? And then we came up with the idea of inviting the presenters of this conference to submit proposals for a chapter. And then if you, in this seminar, we see there, I don't know if we can actually, oh yes, we can. Then that's a colleague from Universidad Playa Ancha. Then it's from Imperial, someone. Alina is from Universidad Católica Temuco. That's a different version of myself. And then Eva Tranamil, who's the lady. No, Eva, if you can move forward. That's our colleague from UDEC. And Eva, there, the lady, also a teacher, graduated teacher, but also a traditional educator, was the one that actually, you know, made all this possible. And then, and that's where it happened. That's the biblioteca, the library in Ralco. So people from all over the country came. We shared our ideas. We invited them to publish. And 10 contributions are found in this book. We brought copies. The idea is to disseminate this quite important material for you as future teachers. Would probably appreciate as well. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Christian. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the editorial process that we had for this book. So as Christian said, the first thing was the call for book chapter. So through the research group, we sent a call to different universities in Chile and also abroad. And this resulted in having several contributions. Some of them are from Chile and some of them are from other countries, as the United States, particularly from a group of researchers who study the Navajo language. So it's very varied, okay? This is an example of the call for book chapter in which we mention more or less who we want to read this book. And it's basically aimed for people who are interested in languages and cultures, okay? So the sections of the book are 3. First of all, we have research reports, And we have a variety of topics here. We have some Fondesit reports. We have topics like perception of exclusion, behavioral communicative competences. And then we have the second section, which is reflections. This is the most extensive section of the book. And we have a bunch of topics, as you can see. All of them are very interesting. And as you can see, there are, for instance, experiences in teaching, the relevance and representation in research, the revitalization of the languages, communicative competences, cultural diversity in political speech. And all of this is also related to one of the topics that you were mentioning, which is the identity that is carried through language, right? And finally, we also have a pedagogical action section, which is very brief, but not less interesting, in a report in which they tell us about the experience of teaching Mapudungun to university students. It's quite interesting. And then the book also has some other sections that are important. So first of all, the introduction, which leads the reader into understanding how this book is positioned in terms of the views, right? Like what we were just mentioning before, how our cultures and our languages shape our identities. Okay, so that is the premise. Then we also have the prologue, which is written by Eva Tranamil, the person that we saw in the pictures. Eva is very important for us and for this book, because as Christian mentioned before, she's the one who had the idea of having a tangible product from the seminar. And she was also the person in charge of Programa de Educación Intercultural Bilingüe in RAICO. And she has a very critical view of that, which is explicit in the prologue, which is my favorite part of the book, actually. And finally, we have the epilogue of the book, which was written by 3 teachers from the Universidad de Concepción, who are in charge of a big project that the university has that is called, it has a very long name, but the short name is Proyecto de Interculturalidad, Universidad de Concepción, short version. Yes, I don't remember the long version. So these are more or less the steps that we followed in the publication of the book. I'm gonna stand up, sorry about that, I'm sorry, because I need to say this. As you can see, we had at least 6 important steps. So first of all, once we had received all the contributions for an entire year, we started with the internal peer review process, okay? And that process is the process in which the 3 of us as editors read all of the chapters, all of them, and evaluate them critically in terms of the content, in terms of the form, in terms of the contribution that we think they provide, okay? So all of us read all of the chapters. We had a rubric and a form to fill in which we would let the authors know the evaluation of the chapters. After that, we typically have a back and forth with the authors in which we send them the comments. They resend a reviewed version. Then if it's necessary, we send comments again, so on. That is a long process, but it's very important when we want to have a quality product by the end of the process. Then after that, and we have like a draft of the entire book. We send it for external peer review. That process is very important because external reviewers make sure the book has the quality of a publication similar to an article in a well-indexed review, right? Journal, sorry. After that is done and the external reviewers say it's okay, we need to start the intellectual property registration. That was the most difficult process, I think, because we send everything and then we need to wait for Propiedad Intelectual to reply, which usually takes months. After that, we get to the publication, which is the birth of the book. It makes you forget all the pains of the pregnancy, right? So we end up with this beautiful final product that we have, which is the book. And And we are now in the process of sending out the copies, the hard copy, to all the authors in the book. So we had to send 21 copies through mail. This we are now. I just sent the last ones yesterday, so we're done with that. It was a long process. It was very rewarding, though, very interesting for us. I learned a lot reading the chapters. And this is the completed volume, the final product, as I said. Now, the book was published 2 weeks ago. It's not been officially launched or released for sale, but we bring some copies to give away. Okay, they're not for sale, but we're going to give them away to you today for being here, for being interested in our presentation. All right. I think that's it on my part. So, Elizabeth, now you can talk about cultural significance. Thank you.
Mari Pupeñi, Mari Polamien, Inche Elizabeth Quintrileo Lamien, Inche Kimel Tuchefe, Come la Kaimi Lamien, Come la Kaimi Pulamien. How are you, everybody, today? I'm going to stand up, all right? Well, first of all, I would like to thank Macarena. Well, you have received many thanks today, but one more. For inviting me, I also want to thank Christian and Catherine for inviting me to be part of this book, whose topic is actually my heart topic. So also, I want to congratulate Macarena, your students, actually. Okay. It's been very nice to listen to every single one of you, everybody that I have heard today. You've done a great job. Macarena, you've done a great job. Okay. Well, so I'm very happy to be participating in this first Foro on Bilingual Education in Chile, Insights into My Language and Identity. And I would like to start. I would like to have a kind of conversation with you. And I would like to, you can participate, you can raise your hands, everybody. I know you're a little bit sleepy, so that's why I want to wake you up. And well, I would like to start with this question. Do we have in our country, Chile, do we have a bilingual education, actually? Do we or we don't? What do you think about that? Raise your hand, those who think we do have a bilingual education. Macarena, I think you are the only one. Okay, another one. Raise, okay, another one. So 3 people think we do have a bilingual education. Okay. A second question for you guys. Who is bilingual? Who is actually bilingual in our country? One people, so apart from English teachers, so I'm going to make my question clearer. Apart from English teachers, in the Chilean society, who is bilingual? Thank you very much. What's your name? Nesta, thank you very much. You're right. So we do have minority groups being bilinguals. So actually, Graham Pillar 2020 claimed that bilingualism is subject to social status, unfortunately. So when we talk about bilingualism, when we talk about language education, we must link that to social justice as well. So we think about English-Spanish bilingualism, we know it's just a minority, but if we even think about Spanish Mapudungun bilingualism, so nobody even talks about that. It is not actually an important topic in our country. We have students in Alto Biobío, 5 years old, 6 years old, monolingual Chedungun language. But when they enter the school system, as they enter in a monolingual education, they lose their language. Megan 2020, 21, and 23 confirms that what Alvarez Santullano said in the 28, that children were punished because they spoke an indigenous language. So that's the reality. If someone wants the reference, I can give it to you later, okay? So that's the reality. So that's why, okay, this book that I'm going to show you right now, that is the significance of this book. We do have English teachers, and we have a part of the society who have the privilege to attend a private school, who are able to be bilinguals, English, Spanish, but we do have other groups as well that are not only Mapudungun, Chedungun, Spanish bilinguals, but what Aymaras bilinguals. We have Banangara Banui bilinguals. Now we have the immigration process. We have Creole, Spanish bilinguals. And even we have people from Peru, people from Bolivia, whose indigenous language is Aymara and Quechua language as well. So we still have a lot of groups that are bilingual. So the purpose of this book is to recognize not only dominant languages like English and Spanish, but to consider that bilingualism, cultural and linguistic diversity goes beyond dominant languages, goes further than that. It's more than one we can have in here, right? Having that said, what's the role, as I said, as I saw at the end of the presentation, implication for the classroom? I have another question to end. I was informed it was 10 minutes, so I hope that I can make it. Having this said, considering this panoramic view of bilingualism and bilinguals, all of these languages that I have mentioned today, what could be the role of you, everybody here, pre-service teachers, I'm going to say, what would be your role? What can you do? Can you do something? Or you are going to continue with the colonization process? Will you continue, okay, to be colonized? Will you do that? I don't know. I don't know you that much. So that's why I'm asking you, is there something you as teacher, language teacher, second foreign language teacher that you can do? Is there something? Who would like to answer my question? I would like to listen to you. Yeah. What's your name, honey? Trinidad. I'm going to give you a phone, please. There you are.
Okay, so thanks to this seminar, we can recognize that language is not just a tool for communication. So definitely, it also is related to identity, emotions, and personality. So our role as English teachers is to embrace our culture by teaching the language. We not just have to teach English as with the, I don't know if I could say, like the US culture or the UK culture. We can also use the language and embrace our own culture and identity using and learning a new one.
Thank you very much. That was. Thank you very much. It's no, the battery, running out the battery. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your answer. So,
yes.
Yeah, definitely. How much culture in your classes? How much cultures do we see in our classrooms? Yeah, I have another question.
It's working. Yeah, it's accidentally working.
Yeah, there you are. Oh, another answer in here. Thank you. What's your name?
Christian.
Christian. Okay. Yes.
So in relation to what Trinidad was saying and what you're mentioning, plenty of us in our practicum experiences, plenty of us have talked about it, and we never expected to face such multicultural context within the Chilean classroom. Because, for example, I'm 30 years old. My memory of my educational process, it was like, okay, there's not really that much cultural diversity in Chile. But nowadays, Chile has become extremely multicultural. And I know that a few of us have had students from Haiti, from other places that don't really speak the language. It happens in a similar way with physical disabilities, blindness, deafness. And our principal role has been not only of teaching a language, but to to build bridges and become facilitators, not only for them to experience our culture, but for us to also experience their culture and create this sort of the beginning steps of what in the US is considered the melting pot That sadly nowadays doesn't happen as much, but Chile is heading in that direction. And I think that that is our sole responsibility, not only to provide the language, but to provide common ground and a common play field for everyone to share their culture and understand one another.
No. See, it's working. I insist.
Well, thank you very much, Christian. Well, that was impressive. Okay.
Hello.
Lorena must be very proud of. Well,
Continues to work.
so we have many roles, but I think particularly English teachers have the biggest responsibility. That's my perspective. And we do need to embrace culturally responsive teaching, culturally relevant practices in the present context we are living today. Starting from embracing, indigenous cultures and indigenous languages that have not been recognized for centuries. So there is a rich culture, a rich contribution, and a lot of things we can learn from elders, from Mapuche teachers, from Pehuenche teachers, from indigenous scholars. So I invite you to make the change, to collaborate, and to embrace our cultural identity. Child to mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the three of you for this meaningful and much needed contribution to the field of bilingual and intercultural education. I think we have enough time for one question, if that's okay. But anyway, please, once we finish the event, you will have plenty of time to ask the questions to the presenters. And also, we are recording this forum, so we will make the recordings available with all the information, with all the contact information. So if you want to speak more about indigenous languages, you can always contact the presenters directly, or we can invite you again. That would be fun too. So, do we have a question in the audience? Can you raise your hand, please? Do I see a hand? Okay, I knew it. Okay, can we have a mic for Christian? Of course.
Okay, sorry. I find this extremely interesting. In your expert opinion, right? What do you think would be necessary? What would it take for not only Chilean culture, but Latin American culture in general to actually have official recognitions of these languages?
A tough one.
Anyone?
Well, I'm going to start since you're taking too long. I think it's a good question, and it's kind of difficult to answer because, as Elizabeth mentioned in her presentation, there has been centuries during which indigenous languages have not been respected as they should. It's very difficult nowadays in linguistics. We are seeing changes in the views of the people who are in charge of the research, for instance. We're trying to recognize that there's not a language that's better than another language. That's not a thing. That does not exist. All languages are important. All languages should be recognized and valued as the same. I think it's related to a thing of prestige. That is a terrible thing. However, I think there is hope because we see that these trends are changing and we are seeing more people recognizing the importance of the different languages that we have, even if they are spoken by minorities. I think it's very important to protect minoritarian languages because they are older than, for instance, the colonizer languages. But due to the violence that has been employed in the colonization process, they have been lost. So our job as linguists is to revitalize those languages and protect them as much as we possibly can. And we can start with small steps in the classrooms, such as providing space for all students to show their cultures and to practice their own cultures and their own languages.
Eli.
Christian and everybody else, I'm sorry to say that I'm quite pessimistic. I'm realistic as well. Education is monolingual, and our country, our culture, from my perspective, have been for centuries ethnocentric or Eurocentric. Everything that comes from the outside of the country is good. However, we do have many positive people. We do have many contributors in our own country, but they have been never valued. So a few years ago, we had Machi Linconao, and Teresa Marinkovic was laughing at her when she was using the language. And we are talking about professionals, you understand? Elisa Loncon was never recognized in her role to make this new constitution. So those examples makes me give you, or makes me feel not very positive. So I think the change is going to start when we as a Chilean society start to embrace ourselves and to start developing our cultural identity, to value ourselves, but start it from the inside. Not to expect or not to have a bad copy of the outside. So I think that should be the start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, I am going to add a little bit of optimism as well, because I think Elizabeth is right. I am completely, in agreement. But from my humble position and from what I can do as a scholar and as an educator of future educators, we are now working a concept in the program where I teach with a colleague, Ms. Cares, Maria Jose Cares, that works around intercultural communicative competence. Because we need to develop oral competence, communicative competence, right? We, are kind of hammering our students all the time about this communicative competence. And then when we decided to delve into intercultural communicative competence in our future teachers of English. And I think these small initiatives, these small, efforts can contribute in the long run to what Elizabeth was, alluding to, and to what Catherine was also trying to approach. And that's it on my part. And on that note, I would like to say that we're going to leave some copies for Mauricio, the dean, or even Gabriel, the head of the program, or Macarena here. People I know, people I've worked with before, people I've taught even, to come up with a system to, hand out these books, these copies, until our institution make these books or volumes available for purchase. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for
so much. Gabriel?
Thank you very much. All right, my name is Gabriel. Well, I think that you all know me. And I just would like to say something. First of all, congratulations to the publication of your book. Congratulations to all the students here who have done a great job to finish this program. You did a very, very nice job. Congratulations. Congratulations to all of you. And I would have to say that there are not many opportunities for people to say publicly
the achievements or the admiration that we have for our teachers. There is always a few teachers who we remember all the time throughout our lives, and Mr. Sangüesa here is one of them. Maybe he didn't know, you never knew, but I have to say that he has a very special place in my memories as an educator. And when I think of a great teacher whose classes I really enjoyed and learned a lot, his name comes to my mind. So congratulations. I'm very proud to see you here as an editor in this publication. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Oh. Please stay there. Okay, guys, could you please stay there? So before we conclude, we would like to take a moment to recognize the editors of the book just presented. As a gesture of appreciation for their inspiring contribution to this forum and to the field of bilingual and intercultural education, three student representatives will now present a small token of gratitude to our guest speakers. We invite Nesta Arriaza, Fernanda Norambuena, and Cristian Parragués to come forward and offer a gift to Professors Catherine Díaz Vargas, Cristian Sangüesa Campos, and Elizabeth Quintrileo Yancao. So Alejandra is taking a picture. Thank you, guys. Give it up for the presenters. Okay, guys, thank you. You may go back to your seats. Yeah, you may go back to your seats. Thanks to you. Before we officially close today's forum, we have a special surprise for our student presenters. As a token of recognition for their dedication, academic effort, and the high quality of their work throughout the semester, the English Language Teacher Education School would like to offer a small gift to each of them. We now invite Professor Gabriel Pairican, head of the PREMI program, to come forward and present these gifts. We will call the students group by group. First, we invite Nesta Arriaza, Laura González, and Isaac Villa to come forward. Next, Juan José Faúndez, Paula Palma, and Andrés Urrutia. Now, Diego Cerda, José González, and Víctor Porciúncula. Okay, so now we invite Catalina Gutiérrez and Lorenzo Soto. Next, Javiera Viera, Elizabeth Saldaña, and Spencer Silva. Yes, let's continue. Something happened with the bags. We have them all, I promise. So we will figure it out. Next, we have Trinidad Cisterna and Fernanda Norambuena. Please come forward. Deben estar adentro. I'm pretty sure they're inside. Please forgive me. I'm going to keep them in 20 minutes. Finally, Cristian Parragués, Rodrigo Santis, and Adrián Naranjo. Yes. Thank you, guys. Okay. Thank you, Professor Gabriel Pairican. And congratulations once again to all our students for their meaningful contribution to this forum. As we come to the end of this first Forum on Bilingual Education in Chile, we want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for your presence and participation, whether here in person or joining us online. Today has been a celebration of ideas, research, and collaboration across borders and disciplines. From our distinguished keynote address to the insightful student presentations and the launch of a significant new publication, this forum has reaffirmed the vital role of bilingualism in shaping more inclusive, informed, and dynamic educational communities. We especially thank our guest speakers, our student presenters, and everyone who worked behind the scenes to make this event possible. Let this be the beginning of an ongoing dialogue, one that continues to explore the intersections of mind, language, and identity in our classrooms, institutions, and communities. To close this event, we warmly invite you to a cocktail reception outside the auditorium. However, I must warn you that I've been told that restrooms are not available at the moment because something happened with the water in the university. But the cocktail reception is on. Thank you for joining us today in this celebration of bilingual education. Have a wonderful day. Yo lo guardo.